good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Jovel bringing you the Faith Seeking Understanding podcast. This is our pilot program, our pilot episode. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you more of the person behind our title of podcast, which is the Faith Seeking Understanding podcast. Faith Seeking Understanding. This is a Christian saying that has been handed down to us from the 12th century. And this is the saying that it was used by a person whose name was Anselm of Canterbury. He was born in the year 1033 and died in the year 1109. He became Archbishop of Canterbury. That's why he's known as Anselm of Canterbury from the year 1023 until the day he died. He was born in Aosta, Italy, and became a monk when he turned 27. And this took place at Normandy, at Beth, France. And he stayed there until he was 60. So he was made all the way through the ranks until he became the abbot of the monastery. So because he became a monk. And then he was appointed Archbishop of Canterbury, and from there he stayed there until he died. But he was exiled twice by the kings of England because he wouldn't budge. He wouldn't bow himself to their wishes. He was a pretty much supporter of the Hildebrandine reforms in 1075, and these are reforms that were aimed at reforming the Catholic Church, which was the only church at the time in the West. Let's remember that in 1054 there was the Great Schism, which meant that Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, and Christian Orthodox, they broke. Just talk about the only reason I want to say is that they broke. Because the West, and also we Protestants believe that, we uphold that the Holy Spirit comes both from the Father and the Son, while the East, which is Eastern Orthodox, they believe that the Holy Spirit only comes from the Father. So that was the main, how can I say, that was the theological issue. They were political ones, but I just want to stick to the theological issues. So these reforms, the Hildebrandine reforms in 1075, were promoted by Pope Gregory VII. They were to ensure that no secular king could appoint clergy. The kings, they wanted to appoint not only priests, but also bishops and archbishops. And we see this in the Protestant Reformation later on, how the secular forces, the secular authorities, aim at setting up their own bishops, their own priests. We can see this in Calvin's Geneva. So the Protestants didn't like, and when they saw back at this reform, they didn't like it. They saw it as a tyrannical move. And he also decreed that the priests should embrace and must embrace celibacy. And as you know, celibacy is the practice that the Roman Catholic Church has for the majority of their priests, because there's some Melkite tradition in the East. They can marry, they can get married, and also some Anglicans are allowed to come to move over to the Catholic Church and with their wives and children, and still stay priests, but they are not allowed to go to be bishops. So there were two other reforms that both Pope Gregory VII and also Anselm of Canterbury, which became the Archbishop of Canterbury, he both promoted wherever they were. But Anselm wrote a lot of things, and among them was one of his most famous treatises, Cur Deus Homo, or that was in Latin or in English, why God became man. And I remember I studied this in my theological degree. It's a very philosophical take, but explains why God the Son took to be a man, and we're gonna see later at the end why he believed that as well. That why did God the Son became a man? Um, and so it's an important read for us today that people don't want to accept that God became a man. I can think of Islam. Islam does not accept that God died on the cross. Even they reject that there's a Trinity, and they also believe that God will not allow either Himself, not even, but also none of His prophets to suffer as Jesus did. So his theological contribution, Anselm's, was on the atonement. From the time of Origins, this Origen is one of the church fathers of the early 3 centuries of the church. He lived in the 2nd century, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to look that up. Origen lived in the 2nd and 3rd century. In 184, he was born, and he died around 253. So, from his time, he believed, or he taught, that Christ died in order to pay ransom to the devil. Anselm didn't like that. So Anselm proposed that the atonement, or Jesus' death on our behalf, was necessary to satisfy the majesty of God. So it took away the idea that God had to pay the devil somehow. No, it was God paying Himself or justice because His majesty is so great. So God needed a great. Not men couldn't save themselves because no man can be great. So it needed to be God. That's why I said, why did God become man? And why God became man was because man cannot redeem himself. He needs somebody greater and more majestic. So that was Anselm's take or contribution to the theological discussion regarding atonement. He is the major proponent of the ontological argument. And the ontological argument, it's mainly, the explanation is, Anselm said that God as that than which nothing greater can be taught. And he also argued that this being must exist in the mind, even in the mind of the person who denies the existence of God. So he suggested that if the greatest possible being exists in the mind, it must also exist in reality. So that's what mainly is the ontological argument, which could be more, but I don't want to go into so much detail. Maybe in one of the latest, in one of the following episodes, I can go into the ontological argument and dig more into it. But this is only to introduce who Anselm is. So this is the Faith Seeking Understanding podcast. In this podcast, I'm going to try to understand the Bible mainly, why it says what it says, how it was put together, how we're to understand the life of Jesus, how we to understand what the apostles wrote, their purposes, and also their application. We're going to try to see the world from a Christian worldview. And we're going to ask questions. And we're going to try to get answers. So this is the Faith Seeking Understanding podcast. I'm Louis Jovel. I'm here in Australia. I'm in Melbourne, Australia. I've been here for 3 years. I grew up in the USA. But I'm from El Salvador, a Spanish-speaking country in Central America. But like I said, I grew up in the U.S. Most of my family, whom I grew up with, are in the U.S. and I'm here in Australia. I studied with the Anglican Church. I studied with the Anglicans. I got my Bachelor of Theology, then I got my Graduate Diploma of Ministry, and now I'm doing my Master of Theology through Charles Sturt University. So this is gonna be a podcast that will try to explain things from a Christian, mostly Protestant point of view, and to be more exact, maybe a Baptist, because I'm a Baptist. But I hope that you will learn along with me, and it'll be very informal. I mean, I write stuff, but I like talking to the microphone, and you see, I'm excited. I like talking to the microphone and feel like I'm reaching out to whoever is listening to me. And I hope that you will be upbuilt by this knowledge, and we're gonna be able to have some discussion, both in the in on Facebook. We're gonna open a Facebook page, but also in on YouTube. These talks, these audios will be uploaded to YouTube, and also here in Anchor FM if you wish. One thing I'm gonna ask, I will ask every time I talk to you. Please give a thumbs up or give a star if you are listening through iTunes. I'm gonna submit this podcast to iTunes as well. Or better yet, maybe you can leave a review. Leave a review if you think I'm going too easy on you, or you want more, or you wanna suggest any type of things that we could talk about. It's not only me. I would like to have your input as well. Also, in the future, I hope that maybe some of you may be willing to maybe financially support me, in the sense to give me through Patreon or to other means. You can also donate in order for me to buy books or to pay the light and whatever I'm using to create this podcast. But that will be the bigger the audience. I hope the more demand and the more interesting things we can talk about. Well, this is Louis Jovel from Australia, inviting you to follow me once a week to this podcast, the Faith Seeking Understanding podcast. See you then.